Going for boost over. Well, I think going for boost if you're a boost merchant, like someone like AJ or someone, you go for boost.
100% of the time.
Yes.
Always, every second of every game. Ball's going in your net, don't worry about it. Go get the boost and make sure you've got the full 100 to celebrate with the other team.
Boost over ball is a good time when your opponent is dribbling towards your own corner and you know it has no threat to go into your net at all, and your teammate is behind you for sure. If all of those align, it's better to just take your corner boost, let him just dribble into the wall for useless, and force him to go back with 0. That would be a better time to take boost over ball.
If you've ever wondered when the best time to go boost over ball is, you've come to the right place. Hello and welcome back to the Boost Over Ball podcast. Today we have a special interview with Belleair Baller, podcaster, RLCS statistician, and analyst. We talk about everything from the current state of NA Rocket League with FaZe and Gen G to predictions for the upcoming major. This is a fantastic episode. I think it went really well. Please, I hope you enjoy, and give him some love with the links I post in the episode description. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, man. It's something that I've kind of been into for a long time. I mean, in my professional life, I have a sports background. I went to school for it. I've worked in, professional and collegiate, traditional sports, I guess you would say, not legit sports. But, esports kind of was a natural progression of that. I mean, being around the collegiate scene when I was in school, I was the traveling manager for, I went to Florida State. A lot of firsts on this podcast. I've never really given personal info, but it's cool. I was the traveling manager for them, and then I kind of transitioned once I entered the workforce, and, I spent a smidgen of time with the Dallas Cowboys as an intern, and then I work for the Tampa Bay Lightning, the hockey team, and COVID kind of took a lot of stuff online. I mean, I had always played a lot of video games, even back to being a kid, like old school RuneScape, and then like COD 4, and then NBA 2K, and I've kind of touched in on a lot of stuff. But really, once COVID happened and I was kind of sitting on my hands with a little more free time than I had before working in sports, and there being 0 events or concerts or anything, I had a couple of buddies who played a lot of Rocket League, and as somebody who has turned down probably 20 invitations to start playing games in the past because I'm a person who just plays one game. Like, I don't put my fingers on a lot of things, and they're like, hey man, you got to play Rocket League. And I was like, no, because I know if I play it, I'm going to be bad, and that's going to make me mad, so I'm just going to have to play it a ton. And finally they broke me down, and I was just hooked instantaneously, just putting in so many hours. And as a competitive person, my kind of knee-jerk reaction was to say, I mean, there's got to be a professional scene for this. So I found the RLCS, and that was probably season 9, season X roughly, and
Okay.
From then just dove in head first.
That's awesome.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, I mean, I am a big fan of your tweets. I'll put your social media links and stuff in the episode description. But I come from a science background. I generally enjoy more of the stats stuff that especially for like the NFL, like their the Amazon Web Service, they put out like their advanced
Sure.
metrics. So it's cool to see that people are starting to do that and using that to their advantage for Rocket League.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's my first, because I came from basically an NBA fandom background, and stats took that over just like they have a lot of other traditional sports. And so getting in here and there basically being no stats, it's scary to tweet numbers. You have a science background, so you're probably a little more comfortable with it, but I am about as bad at math as people come. So every time I tweet something out, I'm so nervous.
And
But
I have to like double check everything because all my numbers are in metric, and
yeah,
nobody
yeah.
knows that.
I like tweeted out. I'm like, oh man, hopefully I don't. Hopefully that wasn't completely wrong. But yeah, it's cool to see that the RLCS is kind of at the forefront, like for being such a young esport, to kind of be picking stuff up like that. And there's a ton of people, especially on Twitter and YouTube, who already I feel like do it a lot better than I do. But I'm happy to contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I like there's certainly, in my opinion at least, a lot of room for growth with like statistics and analytics in esports in general, but more specifically Rocket League, right? So you think about like a lot of the maybe not tier one organizations, but like
Hmm.
bigger organizations that are going to try and get like a bang for your buck team, right? Like M80 coming and picking up the team that they did, Luminosity picking up previous teams that they did, like Evil Geniuses have come in and gotten like a not like the top level roster and have found success. So like using metrics like that, I think could help a lot of these smaller or not tier one organizations find a pretty like bang for your buck team to sign.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's great to kind of, proverbially moneyball your way into it in some ways. And you might have more perspective on this as well, but just as I remember early on, what kind of drove me to start looking into stats and things like that was watching high level Rocket League. I was like, I have no clue what's going on. Like, it's so fast. I can't tell you who's good at defense, who's necessarily great at offense. And of course, now our understanding is growing, but I tried to look into stats and it's just so difficult to decipher. Like, you had reached out, I know you and Karma had touched briefly on like the challenge aspect of things like that. Like, I have no clue. If you told me that, M80, for example, were the best challenging team, I'd be like, yeah, maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's cool to see kind of the discussion getting a little deeper. But I don't know if you kind of look at it and feel like stats are progressing, or if they've stagnated, or if we're kind of missing, if there's big gaps in the statistical armor, as it were, or where you kind of lie on things like that.
I mean, I am a big ball chasing fan.
Yeah.
So, the stats that they have on their, website are seemingly endless. However, there's like from like the coaching side, there are certain statistics that I can look at to try and help like direct players to like try and improve, right? So like the like overfill like on boost
Hmm.
is a big one. Like amount supersonic. Like
Sure.
boost used like not like wasted. Like if you're already going supersonic, you don't need a boost. Like amount
Yeah.
of boost wasted, things like that. The heat maps are super cool. Like
Yeah.
showing like player positioning and stuff like that. But I would be interested in, and I don't know how you would track it through ball chasing because it's not like technically a stat, but like 50s.
Hmm.
So like, I mean, you'd have to be something in the coding with like a person touches a ball, but then another person also touches the ball like roughly at the same time. I don't know how you would measure who wins or loses a 50, but yeah, I mean, like Karma specifically said that she feels like EU is ahead of NA because NA does not challenge well. Their midfield game is not very good. And you kind of see that and you think back and you're like, okay, well, what series have I watched recently where that shows? And you're like, oh, well, the grand finals at World Championships. G2 looked
Yeah.
phenomenal all through playoffs. And you look at it and you're like, oh, well, shit, they played all NA teams and Furia.
Hmm.
And Furia, it's like really very offensive. There's very little, there was very little defense at that time in Sam.
Sure.
And then you get to the grand finals against an EU team, and it looks like they shit the bed.
The buzzsaw that
Yeah.
was BDS.
That like I didn't even think. I mean, BDS was playing well, but I didn't think they were playing that well. And I thought G2 was the best looking team in the tournament, and they like see it appeared. I know it's not, but like it appeared that they just didn't want to play. They're like, we're done for today. It's fine.
Yeah, we made the grand finals. That's pretty cool. Yeah, because BDS was transcendent in that game, and really a lot of stats. And it's kind of I don't want to derail the point too far, but it's kind of a lot of it really comes down to the eye test at this point in time, right? Like, statistics are really useful, but it is kind of nice that you still have to kind of watch the games. Like, a lot of my I try and like parallel a lot of the kind of framework I use for the RLCS to have it rooted in another sport. Like for me, it's the NBA. Kind of what has been the historical kind of growth of that, where have statistics gone, what can we learn from those, where can they be misleading, and then try and take some of that knowledge and bring it over to the RLCS. And there's some people in the NBA who are just so into statistics that it kind of glazes their reality of what's actually occurring when you watch basketball. And it's cool that we're kind of in this nice little sweet spot where, like, of course I am somebody who is really interested in seeing the progression of statistics in the RLCS, but for this little pocket of time it is kind of nice that you still have to watch like a ton of Rocket League to have an informed opinion. But I don't really know, that point just kind of trailed off. I don't really have a segue back to what we were talking about. But
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point though, because like I mean I played hockey growing up. I have a hockey, like I know it's like some hockey metrics, and like
yeah,
they have like predictive models about, you know, like certain stats like points per game and like, you know, goals above replacement, stuff like that. I'm sure that there's stuff for NBA. I don't know them off the top of my head, but like there's some players that like the analytics community just love. Like their analytics are phenomenal, and you watch them and you're like, how do you like them? They're not good. Like what is going on?
yeah,
And so like I'm sure that there's like, just like with any other sport, there's going to be people that like pass the eye test, but you're like, okay, well this is like, for me the person that pops out is Calm.
yep.
Right? You're like, okay, well, there's no way that this is sustainable. There's no way he can continue to perform at a high level as he has been, but then he does.
And it's interesting how he's kind of one of the people who falls victim to, it's so tough because we don't have a lot of cumulative analytics at this point, but rating is something that, especially when I first started looking at things, it was like my holy grail of like, the rating, like here is the answer to all my questions. But you look around just kind of the whole scope of the RLCS, and you see some people who are rated so poorly, but then you actually watch, and it's typically some of your veteran players. Rating doesn't love defense, like Torment, Com is always down there, Arsenal is always down there, and it's like, I know they're better than what the rating says, but it's also like a fairly good barometer for where things are. So I know it's going to continue to get better, but it's we haven't got the perfect, the chef's kiss of ratings just yet.
Yeah.
But
And I mean, even like
yeah.
even the game itself doesn't like necessarily reward all, like in the statistical categories that they track, like in the game, it doesn't necessarily reward people like sufficiently in some cases. So like you look at
Yeah.
someone like Atomic on G2 or Mist on FaZe, and it's like, well, their job is to clear the ball and win the midfield challenges before the ball even gets to your defensive half. But you're gonna
Yep.
get 2 points for touching the ball, and that's it. Like you're gonna get like a hockey assist, right? So like it's Mist passing it to Sipical, who's, you know, diming up AJ for a goal, or first killer for a goal.
Yeah.
And like that doesn't go on the stat sheet, but that like plays such a huge role in like the outcome of the game.
A massive part. And there's all of the kind of intangible stuff that is impossible. It's like I don't have a hockey reference, but like Draymond Green, who historically never shows up on the stat sheet, but there's so many intangible things, from leadership until he punched his teammate, but leadership and, what he can do to kind of make things happen off the ball. Like Extra is a pretty good parallel to him. Like there's a lot of stuff where it's like, if you just looked at strictly just pulled the Excel sheets or looked at ball chasing, you'd be like, wow, Extra is like a pretty mid-tier player. But and that kind of gets into this whole BDS rabbit hole of what's going wrong with them. But he's one of those players who does more than what the stats show. And there's people who have their stats show more than what they actually do. It's all over the board, and it's impossible to kind of, how do you go between the regions and make the stats make sense? Like it's so difficult to, if you just sort by everybody, it's like, oh cool, so APAC is the best region in the world, and it's not even close. They're averaging like 5 goals a game. It's like, okay, it's just like unbelievable. But yeah, that's my stats tangent. Thanks for letting me.
I have one last question on the stats
For sure,
tangent
yeah.
then, and it may be less of a question, more of a like a topic, but like,
Sure.
I mean, you bring up the region bias, and that is something that I have not thought about and like that, like you watch the RLCS broadcast, you go to like an event in person, they put it up on the big screen. It's like, FaZe is averaging 2.6 goals per game, and then before the move, Furia is averaging 6 a game, and you're like, oh well, this isn't going to be close. Well, no, Furia played in Sam, and Sam was not a very big defensive region, and it was a lot of solo plays, so they score a lot of goals. And you look at someone like OCE. OCU's pretty high scoring. It's not necessarily because there's no defense. It's just they play a very bump demo heavy style, a lot of passing plays, and that's how they do it. And then EU is, they've started to differentiate themselves and separate themselves as being head and shoulders above other regions, and passing plays, solo plays. You look at like the success of like Liquid and Carmine Corp, and like it's hard to compare statistics for teams that very rarely play against each other.
For sure. It's really like it's an imperfect science. There's no way to do the task in a way that makes perfect sense. But a couple of things that came to my mind while you're talking about it is like it hurts my eyes to just look at a ton of numbers and make sense of that. So something I got into the habit of doing was trying to pull averages and like doing it for each region, right? So if I tell you like these are made up numbers, but if I tell you like First Killer averages 2.12 goals per game, like that kind of doesn't really, it's just kind of a floating number for me personally. It's not really rooted in anything. Like I don't really understand, we don't have enough history to kind of know what that number means. Or maybe a better example is like Nali has 1.7 like goals per game. Is that good, average, bad? So finding averages and then kind of using certain players that I know as kind of like anchor points. Like if you're trying to compare OCE to North America, for example, I have no idea who 60% of the players in OCE are. Sorry to the region, but I don't watch enough of it to feel super informed. But I sure know who Super Locky is. I know who Fiber is. I know who, Torsos is, players like that. So using them as anchor points to seeing where they lie within the averages and then saying, okay, cool. So now that I have that context, I can now take that and try and parallel it to North America and try and make the numbers make a little more sense. That's something that I've tried to get into the habit of doing. But even with all of that said, it's impossible within North America because there's so many different play styles. Like it's really difficult to compare who's a really offensive Space Station Gaming who scores a lot to version 1 who are a more defensive style. Like how do you bridge the gap between those two teams and what their styles do? So I don't know, really it's like it's tough to just kind of dive headfirst into stats. Really what I try and do beforehand is like have a question and then try and attack it with the numbers as opposed to just like looking at the stats and being like, let me see who's good, because we just don't have enough context. Like the RLCS has only been around for less than a decade for sure.
Yeah.
So we don't really have the historical understanding of how things have gone, and even within that context, it's so new that what we see now is just leaps and bounds better than what season 3 looked like. So it really is all kind of an impossible task. I feel like we're just kind of laying the foundation for the next couple of years when all of the numbers will make a lot more sense than they do now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't envy the task of trying to compare stats that are seemingly like not comparable.
Yeah,
like you said, version 1 plays a very defensive style, so they win a lot of games 2-1, 1-0, whereas a Space Station's going to try and win like 3, 4, 5 goals, and they don't care if they let up 3 or 4. If they're winning by 1, it doesn't matter. But so it's like, how do you compare that to the fact that Beast Mode's averaging a goal a game where Daniel's averaging 3? Like those are not real numbers, but like but version 1 is doing better than Space Station. You're like, okay, well that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. They're not scoring. But
yeah.
So I think it's, again, it goes kind of back to that, like the eye test with the analytics until the analytics get to a point where you can bridge that gap.
For sure. And even the eye test is tough, right? Like if I were to ask, and this is like a rhetorical question, but if I were to ask you like, what does Parth do? It's like, well, he kind of he's like in the midfield and he like assists and stuff. It's like it's just so, or he's a pretty fringe example. Like who's somebody better? Like Garrett G. Like what does Garrett G do? It's like we're still also building out like the vocabulary to contextualize what we're actually seeing. Like Garrett is fast and he scores, and the best buzzword ever is mechanical, right? You can just like kind of slap mechanical on it for like 85% of players. You're like, well, he's like super mechanical. And it's like, well, there's no, that's like taking like hockey and being like, he's really athletic. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, thank you for the, now I know exactly.
I feel like if you did like the drink every time somebody said mechanical, you'd be
Yeah.
dead. You'd be dead before the broadcast was half over.
Exactly. Everybody's mechanical, and we kind of have no kind of, we don't have the dictionary quite yet to explain it, but it's tough, but it's exciting too. The challenge is part of the thing that makes it so enticing, is to try and understand what the hell's going on.
And there's also probably got to be some like wonder and excitement about being on like the front end of it.
If that's directed at me, thank you for considering me on the front end. I feel like I'm lacking on everything. It's cool to be it's like things have been growing and developing, which is awesome to see, but also it's very nice to still feel, and the numbers show that I'm still a very like small creator, if you want to use that word, because there's not a lot of pressure on me to to do anything. I can kind of just I'm still trying to figure things out, like the Twitter and the statistics. I've been doing that for a while now, but even that is kind of a newer iteration, right? Like it's just trying to kind of keep zigging and zagging until you kind of find the thing that not only works but also is kind of interesting. Like when I first got into the stats and people were like, "Oh, it's cool to see the stats," I was like, "Oh, no, don't like, I don't know how to do any stats. Please, no pressure on the stats or anything like that." But to kind of bring it back to what you're saying, it is cool, right? Like this is it's a brand new esport, and I don't know about you, but I don't really have the full context of other esports. Like I of course have taken I've dipped my toes in the water on a bunch of things. Like I was really into League of Legends for a long time and watched the competitive scene there, like CS:GO and Call of Duty League and stuff like that. But for me, the RLCS, like I think it's gonna be around for forever, hopefully, in some form or fashion. Like it might not always be called Rocket League, and it might take some slightly different forms, but I look at it as the early days of like the NBA. Like it's cool to be able to be here and feel like I am gaining the context now, because it's very difficult to go backwards once you're getting into it. Like I got in at season 9, feel like I have a decent understanding of the seasons previously, but really it's all kind of like the modern game. So it's cool to be getting this experience now as opposed to 3 years from now, and then be like, who the hell is First Killer?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's cool that we're kind of here now and experiencing it, because that'll be really helpful. It'll pay dividends in the long run, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, like we came from like cell phones, like not everybody had a cell phone, to, you know, still using like floppy disks on, computers in the computer lab, and have come, all the way to now, right? Where it's like, I say like on the front, like the front end of like esports in general, but like, I mean, I don't coach for Northwood. I'm not like, that front end.
Yeah.
But like still, I mean, I'm able to coach a collegiate esports team, which is awesome, like for Rocket League, which is awesome. I get to interact with the collegiate like Call of Duty players, the League of Legends team, the Overwatch team. They kick my ass in all those games too. And but I mean, it's cool to be a part of. It's cool to like find like your niche, like you said, and like enjoy like being able to contribute to a scene that's still kind of evolving and growing, like in your own way, right? So like, I mean, I'm not like, the like the Chalked Cast or the CJ show, right? I didn't play professional Rocket League. I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of how to play, how to get better. That's why I'm a coach. That's why I, thoroughly enjoy doing this podcast, being able to like tell people about Rocket League for people who maybe don't have the time to watch every weekend, like I try to do. But it's just, for me at least, just exciting to be a part of it, to be able to kind of listen to people, hear my mediocre takes and my bad predictions for stuff. Although I am running a 3-0 streak on Team Liquid for EU stuff, but that's I had to put that out there because some of my other takes have just been so bad.
That is a rickety streak that you're running there with Team Liquid.
Yeah.
They could totally collapse, or they could win the whole thing. I feel like they're kind of a dark horse going into the major, but I had Falcons as the second best team going into the fall major, so we're even on our awful takes.
Hey, I mean,
they totally fizzled.
They looked so good at Gamers 8. They, until the very end, but they continue to be like the biggest unknown.
Yep.
In my opinion, at least.
It's tough, right? Like, even because it's they didn't get in until last season, right? In fall major last year, they had a sub. They were there with oh geez, I'm gonna be so mad at myself for not recalling. I can see his face.
TRK instead of Ocalid.
They had Ocalid missed.
Yeah,
because
TRK played for him.
Oh yeah, because he's it could have been. And then they had Senzo, I think, came in at some point alongside Ahmad, and but then they couldn't make it to the winter major because of visa issues. And then in spring major, they make the grand finals via uppers, and then they totally fall apart to Moist. And then they never really got to get things going at the World Championship. So it was like, but they've been right there. They've been right at the precipice, And it was the same with Liquid, right? Like, they just came in like spring split, spring major. It was like, dang, they look pretty good. Like, they can kind of get things rolling, but I don't know. That's the tough thing about the RLCS too, is all of us can make predictions from, like, my mom has just as good of a chance of making a prediction as like Johnny Boy does. Like, it's so volatile at these international stages. Like, who knows what's going to happen? You could tell me 9 different teams are going to win this thing, and I would believe you. It's so tough.
I mean, and like there's like uncontrollable, like intangible stuff too. Like, at World Championships, Arsenal like being sick.
Yeah.
Like getting food poisoning or whatever it is that happened to him. There's, Semper getting COVID and only one person being able to play on the stage. There's outside forces can have an impact too. Like Calm standing up and screaming at you from across the aisle. For EU teams in NA, the fans, and the same thing for NA teams in EU, right? Like you're gonna get, all kinds of different things that impact the results. But I mean, that's part of the appeal, and that's the reason people go to the events. That's the reason that people watch.
And it's kind of like we're in the middle of March Madness right now. There's some similar connective tissue to these kind of. It's not one and done because it's a series, but it's kind of a one and done when you kind of. It's all within like an hour,
Yeah.
As opposed to like the NBA where it's like, we got like a week and a half to figure this out over 7 full games and a bunch of time in between. And, so you have that element where it's kind of a one and done. And also, as I knock my mic over, these are kids, right? Like, for the most part, like, relatively speaking, compared to like myself or yourself,
To me,
like we're like dinosaurs compared to the people who are competing in like the mental aspect,
I looked into it at the World Championships, and the oldest player competing, CJ.
Yeah.
He was 25.
Oh, so old.
I was like, jeez. You look at
old.
You look at like Liquid, they're like all 16-year-old kids. You look at like Vitality, they're getting younger, especially with Zen coming in and being eligible for the spring split. I mean, it truly is incredible to watch these kids fucking do some crazy stuff and compete as well as they do and be able to handle the stress and the pressure as well as they are.
I went to a high school of like 100 kids, and for basketball games, our arena would be full of like 25 people watching, and they were all parents, and I would be nervous for that. So the concept of at the same age playing a game that's primarily online and you're never really in front of people, to take that kind of context that you have and then be like, cool, so we're going to drop you in front of thousands of live people, and there's three other players on the other side and tens of thousands of people watching online. Like, good luck. Like, it makes sense why some of these people kind of crumble. But then you have teams like Liquid. Oski just had his 16th birthday, and they've looked awesome at points online. So who knows? It's such an inexact science, but again, that's kind of the cool thing about it.
For sure. But I'll transition us a little bit back to kind of NA, and I want to say we've had a little bit of a changing of the guards in terms of the top of NA, but I don't know if I'm allowed to, like, I don't know if I can say that. I mean, Gen G has been dominant through the fall split and the very beginning of the winter split. They looked fantastic. You know, they missed their first grand finals ever as a team in the winter split, and you know, FaZe is able to, you know, with two major wins, are able to take first place. So I don't know if it's a changing of the guard, if it's, you know, Gen G slipped up. What are your kind of thoughts on that in general, and then do the stats kind of back any of that up?
Yeah, I mean, scattered thoughts about it. Like, I guess first things first, we've seen this from FaZe before, right? Where they hop out early and kind of punch the region in the mouth, and it's like, oh, FaZe, here's what we've always expected. But really, their Achilles heel has always been their online performance. I mean, I think Mist is a net gain over AJ. Like, not that AJ is somebody who can't perform at major events, but you know, Mist is somebody who has been there and done that. He was kind of the first fiddle for that Envy Optic team who made a more impressive world championship run than I think a lot of people thought, and he's kind of been around, so they kind of brought him in to kind of bolster that. Roldiz has the same effect, but you know, it's a great meme, but it's also historical. Like Fourth Killer, they just can't. They've never been able to overcome that hurdle. So we're gonna see. And you know, I think if you're looking at it in a vacuum, I know it almost sounds counterintuitive, but I wonder if it is a negative that FaZe are kind of the favorites coming into this event. If you're a team who has always kind of collapsed under pressure at international events, is the thing that you need to make you feel better about it, having everyone in the scene saying that you're the favorites. I don't know if that necessarily makes the mental, you know, challenge easier for them, but you know, Gen G, I feel like they're still kind of right there. I mean, they did lose twice to FaZe, but one of those was a game seven almost reverse sweep. It was just too little juice too late from Gen G. And the other one was kind of a blowout, but you know, if you're Gen G and you're looking at it, you owned FaZe online or offline rather at the fall major, and you only lost to two teams this entire split. You lost to FaZe twice in playoffs, and you lost to Complexity once in Swiss in the Open, and then you beat the crap out of them in the grand finals of that same event. So I feel like you're feeling pretty good if you're Gen G. I don't feel like there's a lot of pressure on them to win this because they already got it, and there's so many teams out there who can do it. But you know, to parallel that to FaZe, that's probably exactly where you want to be if you're Gen G. Like, you know, nobody's expecting you to win it, so you can kind of just come in here and basically any result is okay, barring like a complete catastrophe. But I just don't think this team. I think their floor is too high to totally fall apart. But you know, at the end of the day, it's results driven, right? Like you were saying, if FaZe are the kings of North America, the results certainly back it up. I mean, this is the best they've looked so far this season, in my opinion. But the $1 million question is, we'll see if they what they look like online. You know?
Yeah, I mean, Fourth Killer is a good one. I've heard that one once or twice before. Our kind of ongoing joke is Fourth Clan.
Yeah, Fourth Clan. Yeah, you know.
I mean, so like, you know, the ongoing joke, you know, phase down Fourth Clan,
Yeah.
and you can't really say that. I mean, they like you said, they're generally their Achilles heel has been online play. They've generally done a little bit better in LAN events than they have online, but they flipped some kind of switch. They figured it out. Roldiz, you know, has them outperforming what they can do, which I don't really think it's that last one, but I mean, they looked Like especially in the Invitational, they looked incredible.
Yeah.
Especially on Championship Sunday. I mean, they almost speed run, like NA almost speed ran that Championship Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like they played one extra game than they had to.
Yeah, it was almost like a perfect sweep the whole way through against some quality teams too, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Complexity. I think I really enjoy the way that they play. It's not exactly the most sustainable, but the flashy plays are cool. I think CRR and Raise Bull and they've done really well. I think that picking up CRR was a fantastic addition for them, and FaZe, quite frankly, just demolished them. Like it was never. I was never close. I never thought that Complexity was going to take a game.
And it is kind of that, to your point, it's kind of that mental aspect of when NRG was at the top, part of it was that they were incredibly talented and their style
Mechanical.
just worked super well. Yeah, very mechanical, exactly. But another part of it was just, I think a lot of teams went into that matchup and they were just like, we're not going to beat NRG. And if you're FaZe, those are exactly the kind of wins you want. Like no playing with your food, no letting series slip away from you. Just like we're going to roll you in a really serious moment. Like that's exactly what you want if you're FaZe. And I think, you know, now that we're kind of past it, looking back at them losing to M80 in the open in the quarterfinals, I think that was the best thing that could have happened to them this split. Like it wasn't, you know, you're not just going to waltz in here and kind of walk over teams. Like you kind of got to show up, and I think that got them into form. And you know, they answered the bell to their credit, like to turn around and win two straight. It definitely brings them some momentum. Unfortunately, there's like what 5 weeks in between that invitational win and the major, so who knows how much of that'll, you know, how much of that momentum will translate. But they're definitely in the driver's seat for sure.
Man, I mean, there's got to be like to some extent, like you think about it with like conventional sports, right? Like there's like you have that swagger to you, you have that like the momentum, the mojo, whatever you kind of want to say. But like, you know, I feel like especially to play at a professional level, you know, regardless of if it's esports or regular sports, you gotta like at least to some degree think that you're the shit.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, you know, is this finally going to be FaZe's internet like LAN event? Because you know, right now, quite frankly, they are the shit in NA. Right?
Yeah, for real.
Two regional wins back to back in dominant fashion. You know, they almost let Gen G like pull it away from them in the open, but they, you know, they've looked fantastic. It's almost like a brand new team in my personal opinion. Just the way that they've been able to come out and dominate teams.
For sure. And you know, I think a big part of it was, I don't know, it's such like a talking head sports like buzz thing to be like X doesn't get enough credit, but First Killer really deserves a lot of credit for how he has adjusted his play style. Like for a really long time, everybody trashed him for being like all he does is ball chase. Like back to the Rogue days,
Yeah.
it's like all he does is ball chase. He's just you know, empty stats, like good stats, bad team guy. He'll never really be able to like take a team over the hump if he's gonna play like this. And you know, he's now kind of a part of a pretty cohesive attack. Like they don't have these, it's not like some crazy inconsistency. Like you kind of know what you're getting from them on the pitch, statistically, mentally, and you know, especially in the online forum. So, you know, First Killer is definitely the best player on that team, so he's just kind of the de facto leader in that way. And you know, I think he's been leading by example. Of course, they've just continued to make iteration after iteration of the roster, but you know, this one looks looks really good. So, you know, they're definitely in the driver's seat.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I've done like some like on my own some like VOD review of some of the FaZe games, trying to see if I could figure out, you know, what's different. Like it's the same team from, you know, from like the first event in the winter to the last, but it doesn't look that way. And you think about it, and I think that Roll Diz needs to get a lot of credit here too, because First Killer does ball chase. that is most of his game. Ball chase, boost, steal, bump, just be an absolute, gremlin to throw the other team off. But they've found people in Sipical who's going to stay home and is a very good defender, and he can shoot really well. And then Mist, who is really that, anchor in the midfield, in my opinion. And so First Killer is going to go and make you panic and throw the ball away. And all of a sudden, instead of, no one being there, now all of a sudden Sipical has 100 boost sitting on the wall with the ball. Like, how did that happen? How did he get so much time and space? It's because First Killer is doing what First Killer does, and he's finally found a team where I think and it's another one of those like esports buzzwords, right? Trust. Yeah. Like, oh, you got to trust your teammates, but like he does, and you can see it because there are times First Killer is going to go for a solo play, and all of a sudden, I would imagine it looks like at least that Sipical or Mist is going to say leave it, and he does. He trusts his teammates to make the plays. That his teammates trust him to leave it to make the plays for him. So I mean, I can't give enough credit to First Killer, to FaZe, to Roldiz. They've made a drastic turnaround in the split, and they deserve to be where they are.
Yeah, and they're also a super smart team. That's something that we're starting to see, like the kind of cream rise to the crop in North America and in Europe as well. But Gen G and FaZe have kind of dominated respectively. I mean, it's kind of a two-horse race between them in NA, and they're both two teams that I think are incredibly instinctively smart teams. They know how to play off of each other. It seems like a lot of the balls and that they're kind of playing into, whatever they're trying to set up, like they play differently on the pitch, but both of them are trying to be very intentional about what they're doing. And it's the same with Carmine Core. I mean, those are three teams who all play totally different, but they're all looking to make intentional plays. And with FaZe in particular, like if you're going to have First Killer be a ball chaser and kind of you're just trying to fully unlock him to his fullest so he can go Super Saiyan mode, to get two really smart players around him in Mist and Sipical who they're playing and they're awesome in their own right, but really a lot of what I would assume they're doing is kind of just playing off of First Killer and being very malleable to kind of fit what he needs. And it's working super well. So this is going to be a real prove it for FaZe. I mean, can you imagine if they get another fourth place? I mean, you'd almost rather them go out in the quarterfinals. Like at a certain point, I think you just get so deep into your own head, irregardless of who you are. Like I don't think it's always fair to like project the mentality of other people onto them. But man, if you go and get fourth again, I mean, you basically have to sell all hope that at the next time they'll kind of get over that hump. It just gets, you're kind of like callousing a wound. You're just continually just, building upon it. So I would be nothing but super thrilled if they end up kind of, pulling it off and winning this. I think First Killer deserves it. I think Sipical and Mist are awesome players. I think Roldiz is the most valuable at majors. They didn't really have a vocal leader beforehand. He's someone who can, get them hyped and animated and kind of, into the moment and things like that. So they're really good, but there's a lot of good European teams too. So
there are, but I'm glad you bring up like that FaZe seems more malleable, because in my opinion that's a pretty big dichotomy between Gen G, where I think that FaZe maybe has more individual talent and skill, and the way that FaZe is built is to allow First Killer to do what First Killer does, and that's a sustainable thing because First Killer is able to do what First Killer does. But then you look at Gen G, they make the extra pass. They look for teammates. The infield passes, the fakes, their challenges are a lot better with, Nolly and Appjack coming from EU. Their midfield game seems to be, head and shoulders above the NA team. So it seems like, their offense is suffocating. They're very rarely on defense. And they play, at least it would appear, like from the eye test, it shows, most of their goals come off of assists. Most of their goals are team plays, whether that's a bump or, you know, a pass. And so it's interesting to see, because in my eyes, the team plays, the bumps, the infield passes are the most sustainable and the easiest to continue to replicate.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if you're relying on, you know, a double flip reset, or, you know, that extra touch on a challenge that, you know, maybe the nerves get to you at a LAN event, maybe the nerves get to you, maybe the crowd gets to you, maybe you're, you know, a little bit more nervous, whereas, you know, Gen G appears to be just solid, methodical, and like rhythmic, I guess would be a word I would use to describe it.
Yeah, I mean that's a really great adjective to describe them. And you know, when you're thinking about play styles that translate to LAN, I know that this was a conversation back when we were first starting to kind of get LANs rolling again to start last season. But it was kind of that argument of which play style is better, one that's pretty grounded and pretty straightforward, or one that is highly mechanical. Can you kind of translate a highly mechanical, solo-centric play style to an event that's in front of that many people, or will you kind of fumble it? Like if it's like football, it's like if you get to the Super Bowl, like would you rather have like an air raid offense that is just a ton of passing and like who knows how it'll kind of go, or do you just want to be a really physical run team and you just know that you can run and that won't really get to you like a crowd? And that's kind of the difference there too. Like, you know, with Gen G in particular, it's a lot of passing plays, it's a lot of communication, it's a lot of they actually get a lot more shots up than people would think. I think they're the only team that's above 10 shots per game between Europe and NA coming into this event. But you know, it's just a team that they can hurt you from so many different spots. Like it's not, you don't know what's necessarily coming. Like with Liquid, the team that you have the streak with, you know what it is. Can you stop it is a whole different thing, but you know what Liquid is going to do. It's going to be this boa constrictor pressure. They're going to take your corners. They're just going to try and suffocate you, make you panic on your own back wall, and just flub one to them so they can, you know, drill one in your net. And just that over and over again. But it's incredibly mechanical. I think we're both going to get drunk if we're playing the shot game. But it's solo plays, it's aerial plays, it's going for physicality to try and create space. Can something like that, where you're relying on flip resets, is that something that can consistently win you games on an international stage? We're yet to see it, but we know Gen G with this kind of, you know, passing style, this rhythmic play style like you were talking about, we know for sure that that works, because I mean, hey, they already won one.
And BDS won a world championship with it, in my opinion.
Yep, agreed. And BDS. Yeah. We don't have to get into that can of worms. But even last season, right? They were really volatile. They won the winter major, and then in spring they were bounced super early. They went 0-3. That's when they lost to Pioneers to leave the event.
That was when they first pulled in Seiko.
When they first pulled in Seiko. And then they win a world championship. It's just like, I don't know.
Just BDS things.
Yeah, just BDS things.
Like there's not really any other way to describe it, right? And then I feel like the last thing I have to touch on for like team specific for the major is G2, right? They at least they're always there. They're always in the picture. Their roster has been a consistent almost as much as NRG's has. They always seem to perform when they need to. They never seem to have enough to put them over the edge to make it to the peak. But I mean, there are times when, you know, suffocating pressure from G2. It looks like Atomic has been the exact addition that they need to kind of fully unlock Chicago and JNAPS. And, you know, it seems like they have pressure for 2 minutes. The shots aren't coming. Like, the shots aren't on net. They can't find anything like that to push towards net. And then all of a sudden it's in their net. They got long clear gold on.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, like you see G2 do so much right, and then they don't complete the game, complete the series. Right? They played NRG a few times recently, and I think are, quite frankly, the best word that I could use, are lucky to have survived those series. They didn't win, They just didn't lose.
Yeah, real scrappy, those series for sure. I mean, I think something that is incredibly important that you said to kind of open up your thoughts was they're always there. I think that's really all you can ask for at the highest level. Like we have so many teams that are kind of a flash in the pan where it's like M80 this time around. And I mean, to be fair, they were still kind of there, but it's like, uh-oh, M80, like, oh man, they take down FaZe. They have a competitive series. I think they lost to Complexity in the semis there. It's like, oh man, this could kind of be a new team, and it's like, nope, it's not how it works. You have to continually be there, especially if you're trying to make these lands. And hey, you know, we just came off of on the heels of talking about these legacy teams, right? BDS kind of had their no, they were really there and now they're struggling. NRG was really there, now they're struggling. I mean, the list goes on and on, but G2 are just continuously just trotting along and continuing to make these events. And you know that they just they won a major last season. Like they're still a very viable roster. So, you know, irregardless of their ranking coming into this, I came out with way too early rankings, and G2 are definitely in my top 6 teams going into this. So I would not be shocked if they pull one off.
I wouldn't either. I mean, they're certainly in. I mean, like, I'll transition a little bit to looking forward to the major here. Looking at groups, I'll put you on the spot a little bit and ask for a prediction. And then, you know, I'll do one and you know, I'll give you what mine are, and they'll inevitably I'll be wrong, but
of course.
It with only in this new kind of format, moving away from the Swiss like we had from past splits, and the World Championships, it's, you know, the group format, right? You're only losing one team per group, and in my opinion, there's two groups where I think that there's one team that's, you know, a little bit lagging behind the rest, and there's, you know, two groups that it'll be a bloodbath.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that G2 has every opportunity to make it out of the group stage, especially in their group. I think that there is one team in there that has not been, that I don't know that is up to standard with the other two. So I think the FaZe, G2 FaZe is going to be a real, like, temperature check on where both of those teams are.
Yeah, and luckily, if you're, I mean, I guess if we're kind of putting on our G2 hats for a second, I think you're pumped about the way that it breaks out here, where you have FaZe to kind of wrap things up. I mean, you have it laid out in front of you, where I think they're starting off Crew. Are they playing Crew first?
Yeah, Crew, then G1, then FaZe.
They go back to back on teams that are comprised almost fully of players that will be rookies at the international stage. None of the Crew players have been to a LAN before. We haven't seen Atomic or Dorito. We saw Dorito if you want to count Gamers 8, but in an official RLCS format, that team is almost fully comprised of rookies as well. So to be able to close out with FaZe, you just need one, right? Like, you just need to win one of these series, and you're effectively a lock to make it to the playoffs. I mean, I don't really know if it's gonna, you know, go to a tiebreaker kind of deal. I think FaZe are probably gonna look pretty good against those teams, but you know, I think you're not over the moon about this group if you land in it. If you're FaZe and G2, like especially FaZe, if you're the highest seed, this isn't like an awesome group. Sam is a question mark. Who knows what that team's going to look like? G1 are really feisty offensively. They're going to turn that into a track meet. At least they're going to try to. And then G2, they've just, you know, they've definitely seen a lot of one another. So if you're FaZe, I don't think you're like throwing a parade for this being your one-seeded group. But you know, what do you think is going to break down for Group A?
In my original prediction, I had FaZe topping the group and Crew being eliminated.
Yeah. I mean, fair, you know? Like, I don't know. It's just so tough. Like you were saying before, it's just we always are going to get something wrong here. Like, we're going to look back at this and be like, dang, Crew was the top of the group. Or, like, you know, like there's just going to be at least one team that is just going to totally shock us in a positive way. and one team that's going to totally shock us in a negative way. Like, G2 totally limped through the fall major. They got 0-3'd by Power, which is probably the most embarrassing result of the season so far. No shade to Power, but G2 should not be A, losing to them, but B, getting 0-3'd by them. So, like, would I fall out of my chair if you told me that G2 get eliminated from this group? Like, no, I don't. I wouldn't bet on it or anything. But I think Peru is just such a question mark for me that you could put him anywhere. But I don't feel awesome about G1 either. I kind of was waving a red flag before we got into the Invitational, and lo and behold, they win the tiebreaker and make it here in the first place. But maybe it's my hometown bias, but I feel pretty good about the two NA teams in this group.
Okay. That's fair. And then moving on to Group B, and we've both mentioned and talked about Falcons. I feel like they can either top this group or they can crash out. I don't know that there's a whole lot of in-between stuff on that one. I think that, personally, looking at the teams that are there, I am the least confident in Dignitas. They make the roster change. Evo has looked good. They had some good results, but in my personal opinion, they lucked out, kind of just like by default making the major.
Yeah.
And in my personal opinion, I have Dignitas being eliminated out of this group.
Yeah, I mean, they got to miss some pretty significant teams in NA on their kind of road to make it here. I mean, the big series that'll kind of, go into the history books was the win over Space Station. That goes 5. Basically, whoever wins that is in the driver's seat to make the major, and Dignitas just ended up coming up with the win there, and who knows what that's going to mean for Space Station. But back to the group, looking at Falcons to kind of hop off here, I just feel like historically they've shown us time and time again that they're momentum based, and really rough to draw Carmine Core for your first round there. I think if they win that series, they probably 3-0. I think if they kind of can get it into their head that they can compete with the best team in Europe, and then they go on to Vitality, who's dragging along 2 rookies, and they have the Zen thing looming over them. Like, they're literally not only playing at their first LAN, but they're quite honestly playing for their spot on this team. Like, if they're trying to go a 4-man roster and they're looking to see who's going to go alongside most likely Zen and Alpha, if you're Radosin and Saizen, I mean, a lot of pressure on them. So I feel like they could probably take that series, and then to close things out with Dignitas, I'd feel pretty good if I'm Falcons if they win the first one, but they could go totally sideways otherwise. I am really interested to see how competitive Dignitas is going to be. I mean, Andy has been able to make the most of this opportunity. He's kind of been around for a while on a lot of teams that have had a little bit of buzz but have never really made a lot of noise. Dree's now on his 3rd team going to a LAN event, which is pretty cool. He goes G2, then Optic, and now he's kind of dragging along Dignitas here. And, we'll see what we get with Evo. He's been awesome in a couple of these series, nay, transcendent in a couple of these series offensively. But this is the big stage, so we'll see what they look like. But I honestly, like, it could be wrong. If you're going to twist my arm, I think Vitality might be looking at an early exit from this group. This is a pretty rough one for them, but that's also if Falcons start out hot and everything like that. So
if they show up, like we know,
it's a lot of if-thens, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's my take. And now to the spiciest group of them all. Group C, with an OCE team, a SAM team, and Gladiators.
Yeah. I'll let you go first on this one.
I mean, is it weird to start with Gladiators? It'll be cool to see if they're competitive. I really don't think so, but it's cool to see a team that isn't Elevate make it here, just to kind of see what the region looks like. And And even that team in and of itself, it's all transplants. It's Max U and OSM who aren't native to the region. So, we're kind of getting some more import talent. Granted, they're there for reasons that aren't what James Cheese / Elevator there for. But, I think really this is just it's a proving ground for one of these top two teams. We're either going to see Team Secret show up and we're all going to remember why they were so good at the fall major, or we're going to, start to solidify some strong opinions on Team Liquid. But they historically have been a team that play with their food and kind of take things deep and lose some series that they shouldn't. They were always a round 5 team when we had Swiss last time around. So, if you're Liquid, you should be looking at this as kind of a statement group here and lock up a 1 seed kind of heading into the playoffs. But there's some feisty teams. Like, who knows what Ground Zero is going to look like,
And I love the addition of Super Lucky for them. I think that was
Oh, yeah.
not a great move from Pioneers, personally.
Awful move.
I mean, he's won the, like, I kept calling it the Super Lucky grudge match, right, in OCE, and Pioneers won 1 out of the 3 meetings of Ground Zero and Pioneers, and it was not super dominant. I think
F tier move.
I think so too, but I think that they could surprise some people. I think that, I mean, I'm sticking with the hot hand. I think that this is Liquid's kind of coronation on the world stage. I think that they have been looking really good. I think their coach Xpear has done a great job being like a calming presence for them, because they have the mechanical ability. Drink again.
Another shot.
Yeah. They have the ability. They've looked really good. They've for this split, I'll talk about, they've been there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone's talking about Carmine Corp. Everyone's talking about how good they look, how dominant they are. Liquid's won a regional. Liquid's been top 4. Liquid's been there. They're the number 2 seed in EU for a reason, and I think that they will continue to look good. I am higher on Elevate than Game and Gladiators personally. I think that they are, they certainly played a fantastic series to be able to get themselves into this major, but if you look back to, the fall major, Elevate doesn't even take a single match in the event before crashing out. And I mean, maybe they take a game or two, but I really don't see that they've differentiated themselves enough to think anybody else is being eliminated from this group.
Totally agreed. It's exciting, but it's kind of what we saw at the World Championships with who was there? Like Gaiman was there, Pirates XD or whatever. Just some of these teams that are just kind of a warm up. Tokyo Verity, a lot of these teams that it's like, thanks for showing up, but
good experience, good exposure,
exactly.
But the region's just not there yet.
The parity's just not there, exactly. So that region, or that group rather, is just a complete blessing for Team Secret and Liquid. But I'm really nervous about Liquid as a like you said, they've looked way better this split, but just based on their historical track record of giving some teams some chances that they probably shouldn't, being very up and down on their results game to game and series to series, this could get rocky pretty quick. I mean, can you imagine, like, they're starting out against Ground Zero? What if Ground Zero comes out and punches them in the mouth and take the first 2 games? I mean, it could go sideways really quick. But I guess it's a double-edged sword with always being an up and down team. Even if you lose a couple, maybe you're like, no, we're fine, and maybe they just storm back. But I feel the most comfortable about Team Secret, which is weird to say, effectively just on one result. But we saw different iterations of those teams. Like Sad and Night were around previously. KV1 was great when the club made the World Championship run, so they have a little bit more resume than people might think. But yeah, that's an interesting group, even though it's probably the weakest of the 4.
Yeah, and then that brings us to the last group, Gen G, Oxygen, Complexity, and Pioneers. Um, like we talked about previously, I think that that dropping Super Lucky was a net negative move for Pioneers, and it showed. They're not first place in their region anymore. I think that Oxygen will get it together. I think that Rise will have had enough time to recover from his broken hand. I think Gen G will, they'll probably drop one game in groups because that's like the kind of thing that they do. But I think that I think it's going to be Pioneers that drop out of this group.
It would be, kind of giving benefit of the doubt to a lot of teams in the field. I would be pretty shocked if Pioneers took a series in this group. Just really strong. I mean, even having Complexity as your third out of four teams is like just not what you'd hope for. You'd hope to kind of maybe, grab like Crew or maybe like a Dignitas or a G1, but Complexity is no joke. They've looked awesome over the course of this split. They've kind of got their wheels blown off by a couple of these top North American teams, but at the international stage, definitely not a team that you will want to see that you're up against. I think if you're Oxygen, you're kind of foaming at the mouth for this group, knowing that you have a chance to go up against Gen G again, who they, destroyed in the Swiss stages of the fall major. You look at that as an opportunity to kind of prove yourself. Complexity is a nice kind of barometer for where you are in the groups here. And then, Pioneers is just kind of they have like a difficulty sandwich where Oxygen have Complexity, and then they have Pioneers, and then they're closing out with Gen G. A lot of really awesome round 3 matchups through and through, and I think a lot of these we're going to be figuring out where people are going to land on the last day. I don't see this land being super clear cut, which is exciting, but also terrifying for exercises like what we're doing now.
Yeah, for sure. And then that brings us to, I guess, where you get put on the spot the most. Who do you have winning the event? Like if you like, who's your prediction to win the whole event?
To be super boring and go chalk, I mean, I've been really really excited about Carmine Core since basically the beginning of the fall split. I think on the Wave Dash podcast, I said after the Open, I was like, this is gonna at the end of the year be one of the best teams in the world. I think they're right there. I mean, they should hopefully have a chip on their shoulder from having a meltdown when they faced Moist in the fall major. They got one forward in front of basically a home crowd. Yeah, so it's probably beneficial that they're going to the US for this kind of go around, but I think they're kind of the front runners here. I think Gen G have the strongest mental. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to twist my arm, I'd probably say Carmine Core, but I think there's really strong arguments for 6 teams here, and I'd listen to arguments for probably 3 additional teams too.
Okay. And then we usually like to do like a prediction like that we think is going to happen, and then like a hot take, right? And so my hot take from like the winter, why can't I think, the Winter Cup in EU was Team Liquid make a grand finals. And that ended up being a good one.
Yeah,
but
that was a good one.
Yeah. So what was your kind of hot take? Either something that you'd like to see happen or something that, not a lot of people would expect.
Out of all of these teams that aren't the front runners here, and we're kind of talking about that top group, is probably Gen G, FaZe, Carmine is probably the top rung for a lot of people. I think Oxygen deserves some real, at least consideration for leaping into that group, especially if they can take down Gen G to kind of get things rolling there. That's a team that has a lot of top end talent. I mean, when they first came up with that roster, the discourse online was this is the most talented team in the world, and that was when they had Oli. So to go and add Rise, who Shift had him as the second best player in the world, I think, or maybe third. Did they go first killer? It doesn't matter. Rise was the top 3 player. So to add him in here, especially 3 players who are known for elevating their performance in a LAN setting, I think Rise is a massive upgrade for kind of a floor general at an international level like this. So that's a team that I look at who, if we kind of fast forward 3 months and Oxygen win this whole thing, I think it'll have been pretty like obvious that we missed it. Just with all the talent that's on that roster. I mean, you could make a strong argument that Joris is the third best player on that team, which, 2 months ago felt like sacrilege to even say. So that's a really strong team that should look even better offline than they have been online. So that's my hot take. Or maybe it's a hot take and a prediction, but that's cheating. So let me think of something else.
No, that's a good one. I think that is a really good one. I don't think a lot of people are really kind of considering Oxygen as one of those, because like you think about it, right, and you're like, okay, well, who's gonna win the event, and you're like, okay, well, you think FaZe Gen G from NA, you think Carmine Corp, maybe Team Liquid from EU, and then the list kind of stops there. Yeah. And so having Oxygen up in that tier, I think, is a good one. I think that it's something that not a lot of people will put a lot of stock in, especially at their performances against Carmine Corp in the past online. So I think that's a very valid one, and I will be very, very interested to see what happens.
Nice, I got a good one. On the spot too. I feel good about it.
Hell yeah. And then before I have one more question, but before we get to that question, I thought I would roll out the red carpet. If you want to plug, your social medias, your YouTube, I'll put the your podcast. I will put the links in the description. But if you had anything coming up or anything that you wanted to talk about, go for it.
Thanks. I appreciate it. At Belleair Baller on Twitter and YouTube. Those are really the only two places that I exist with my content. Twitter is, like you're saying up top, a lot of kind of statistics analysis. I do some rewatches of games and kind of putting some stuff up there. And then YouTube is really some deeper analysis, a lot more kind of cumulative stats and things of that nature. I just put out a video about Gen G as we head into this event and kind of where they should fall within the context here. And I'm working on a video about speed historically in the RLCS from season 1 to present day, which should be coming out soon. So that's my spiel, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I will link all of the social medias in the episode description of this one. And as this is the Boost Over Ball podcast, I got to hit you with, when is the best time to go Boost Over Ball?
Oh my gosh, the best time to go for Boost Over Ball is all the time. Strap down your boost button. Don't even think about your teammates. Don't calm at all. Just say, I got it constantly, need boost constantly. But in practicality, the best time to go for Boost Over Ball is if you're a team like Liquid, who's creating a lot of pressure, because the way to sustain pressure is by contiguously taking corner boosts, and that's something that Oski and Atau specifically do incredibly well. If you look at the data, they are two people who are both in the top 10 for stealing big corner boosts, so that is what allows them to do Liquid things. Hopefully that was a good two-part answer.
Oh, that's a fantastic answer. One of the best answers we got, and I have it in the intro of I made our an intro song, and it's Stack saying,
I heard
all the time, you got to have a full 100 to go celebrate with the other team.
You got to, exactly. Yeah.
And then Lachlan, if you're a boost merchant for someone like AJ.
Yeah.
Yep, there we go.
You got to have it. Yeah, you got to have it.
For sure. But thank you so much for taking the time to join us and join me, and I loved hearing the stats. I loved hearing your take on things. I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Hey, pumped to be here. I appreciate you reaching out. It was a great time chatting with you, and we're gonna see what the major's gonna look like. I feel, I don't know what it is, but I just got a tickle in my belly that your predictions might continue on. We'll see how Liquid's gonna look here.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see. Thank you again.
Yeah. Of course, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Boost Over Ball podcast.